I moved out to LA about, 10 years ago, and a mutual friend called me up and said that this guy needed a sound man for his senior thesis over at USC. And I just decided, okay, I'm not doing anything today, and it was probably going to be like a 2-week shoot, which turned into like, 3 months or something like that?
Yeah, run out of money, finishing it, yeah. So, and we were doing this project where the tone was kind of melodramatic, and after a while, dealing with such melodramatic material, it's like we have the same sick sense of humor. And we just realized maybe this is the wrong project to be working on, but we should be writing together and, and collaborate.
Faster!
Kaylee, I can't believe you came!
Story, and I think it's very powerful, and it's mind-boggling, and you got to pay attention when you watch the movie. But that's good. Makes you think a little bit.
This is, out of all the things that we ever wrote, this is the one that we were like, we won't sell. And when we wrote it, we needed the money more than anybody ever needed money. And it was like a constant battle between the both of us of like, all right, let's sell it. And it was like, no. But, we held on to it and struggled, and we wrote other projects just for the hope that, eventually we could do this project.
This script got them the Final Destination 2 writing assignment. Once New Line kind of had faith in them as writers, got to know them, they figured they'd give them a shot at this. And it's an intense script.
It's been through every possible incantation. I mean, I think the first draft might have been 85 pages, and he was still having covered in this film that are still instantly relatable, and everyone has either been through a horrible experience that will be featured in this film or knows someone very close to them, and it was really important for us. And I gotta say, New Line Cinema was the only studio out there with the guts to actually take this project under their wing.
It's not something that's extremely pleasant, but you know what, reality isn't always extremely pleasant.
Pre-production, I thought, was gonna be like real easy. Like, we're telling David Ellis, the Final Destination 2 director, yeah, we're gonna be in pre-production till, I don't know, like 4 o'clock, and then we'll just come over to the set and have fun, right? And we had no idea that, it's just interview after interview and talking to your production designer down to like what shade of paint is gonna be on that piece of furniture, down to the napkins on the tablecloths in the restaurant scene, and it's never ending. The problem is we have answers for all these questions. Because we had a small budget, we would have to storyboard many sequences. Sometimes kids are in dangerous situations and you have to storyboard everything out, or there's special effects, or Ashton's in a wheel.
Completely showed a completely different side of himself to us, which we're lucky to have.
I did a lot more research for this character than I've ever done before. I spent 2 months is, kind of our liaison to what they want as a team. But, that doesn't stop John from running in every once in a while either, or Eric from setting up a shot every once in a while. So it's, it's an interesting dynamic.
They have a wonderfully economic way of dividing and conquering and handling problems that flare up and keeping the ball rolling. I enjoy it.
They usually give each other ideas, and one of them comes to us and shares that idea. Unless they're really passionate, and they both come full charge. But I have to say, Eric and Jonathan are just really easy to work with, and they know the story, which is, so helpful.
The reason it was great is because they were both on the same page. They both knew, they were both, maybe they're two heads, two ideas, but they always had the same answer. Two heads on the same body, I guess, is one way to say it.
As a producer, it's incredible. You have 2 guys to handle 400 problems versus 1 guy. And they really do, in a weird way, share a brain.
One thing that I do that I'm proud of the project is that it's really unpredictable, and especially, we become cynical as writers, where we can see, in the craft of every setup payoff, and see that I kind of like that, because those are the movies I enjoy. I want to go on that roller coaster ride.
The appeal and the popularity of time travel films lies in the fact that everybody asks themselves, what if? What if I had left work 10 minutes later, then I wouldn't have been at the intersection where I got into a car accident, and I would have been on time for dinner, and I wouldn't have gotten into that fight with my wife or whatever.
I think the allure of time travel stories has to do with the illusion of omnipotent control that we all get to use as a defense against helplessness in a world where we can't really control the outcome of our own actions and our own choices, much less the outcome of the behaviors and the choices and the actions of other people.
There could be hundreds of different reasons why someone would want time travel, depending on their own personal makeup, personality. I've found that there are two basic reasons why people want to travel, either forward or backward in time. One is that we are basically a very curious animal.
Is there a human being who doesn't wish to go back in time and to correct a mistake, to undo a loss, to redress a humiliation, and to control what comes next?
Everybody asks themselves those what-if questions, and sometimes they're small, like what if I had stayed at work 10 minutes longer and avoided that accident? And there are also the big questions. What if I had taken this job instead of that one? What if I had married this person instead of that one? And as long as people ask themselves what the alternatives are for their lives, for the narrative of their own lives, these films will always have appeal.
The second reason why someone would want to go back or forward in time is control. We want to control our lives. Just as in psychotherapy we go back and we look at, parents and how we were raised and how we were potty trained, the same thing would happen in terms of time travel, to go back and make the difference.
From a psychological perspective, I think it would be most useful to think of time travel as a series of metaphors of how we grow and change, of how we attempt to author a creative life, a life that we can make sense of, and a life that is meaningful.
Of course, the obvious is the psychological reasons. My mother treated me badly. I would like to go back and change my mother. I would like to go back and change I'm curious. What really was it like back in Shakespeare's time? To walk around the streets and just observe, not to change anything, but just observe. To go back to Christ's time and observe Jesus walking down the street. Did he perform miracles? Did he do what he did? Is the Da Vinci Code right? What happened? Was he married? All of these questions that come up, being naturally curious and intellectual, these are some of the questions that we want answered.
Because of movies, we can go into Shakespeare's 16th century London. We can go into H.G. Wells's future. We can see these things perfectly well and experience them in a way which people 100 years ago couldn't. They could read about them, but they couldn't experience them. They couldn't see these things happening. I mean, we can, in a film like Gladiator, we can share the experience of being in the gladiatorial ring in ancient Rome.
I really love the Back to the Future movies, especially Back to the Future, the original version, because it's an example of a time travel movie in which every line, every part of the film is tied up and resolved at the end. Even down to the last details of parts of the scenery and parts of the town that are just sort of driven by, or that you only see in the background, all have a past in 1955, a present at the beginning of the film, and then change as a result of everything that Marty McFly did in the past in 1955.
The most interesting ones and the commonest ones are from the present into the future, because we like to see what may or may not happen in 1,000 years from now. And that's the films like The Time Machine and a lot of other of the scientific ones. There's a whole genre of time police movies. There's a film called Time Cop, for example, where they have to have police going through time back and forth to make sure things don't get changed because of a thing called the time paradox, where you can make things all different if you're not very careful. You step on a butterfly at the age of the dinosaurs, and in our time, the butterflies are the only things alive.
Some of the most popular time travel stories are comedies, and they're just about doing goofy things in the past, using the ability to time travel to just blatantly manipulate people and the past to your own benefit. So you get you know, Biff traveling back in time in Back to the Future 2 to turn himself into a media mogul, or Bill and Ted using a time machine just to get a passing grade on their history report.
The thing about time travel, it's not so much what you see, it's how the time is portrayed, you see. When the Terminator comes into our present, it's still our present. It's not, we see some of his future, but we don't actually see him, in a sense, traveling through time. You get this in some of the time police movies, where they are able to move back and forth through time. Time bandits, in a sense, like that.
Films like Minority Report are based on the idea that the future is inevitable, that what you see, or like in that instance, if someone's going to commit murder, they're going to commit murder no matter what you can do to change it in the past. And that is another aspect of time travel stories, where there are characters who are struggling to change the future or change the present, but fate or destiny exists. The time stream is inevitable. No matter what you do, if someone is crossing the street and is going to get hit by a car on August 1st, there's nothing you could do to stop it. It was meant to be.
I think that people coming into psychotherapy and trying to find the handle by going back in time could be very well drawn to time travel movies, because again, it's that semblance of control that one has. That desire for control, that desire to go back, that desire to figure it out, that desire to put things in some perspective so that the chaotic feeling that they have diminishes, so the anxiety diminishes.
But if we were able to magically and concretely go back and revise the past, like a writer who gets an option for a revision and 2 polishes, then it wouldn't be a life. It wouldn't be fluid. It wouldn't be mystical, it wouldn't be magical, it wouldn't be an adventure. What would we learn? How would we grow? How would we have a sense of personal history that has adversity as well as triumphs? How would we gain a sense of competence if we didn't have the feeling that we could overcome our adversity or make use of our adversity? I think that any of us who has truly lived understands that whatever the road not taken, or whatever the road taken that has gone through a lot of bumps, whatever losses we sustained, it's inevitable, it's necessary, and how we deal with it is an essential part and an integral part of who we are and who we become.
Chaos theory, broadly defined, is extreme sensitivity to initial conditions. That given a very small difference in initial conditions, the same system will behave after a very short time totally differently.
I think the chaos theory in psychology is not that different from a physics viewpoint, except that we have the human component. Chaos basically says, can we make a long-term prediction of any kind of a system?
Which brings us to the notion of the butterfly effect, a seemingly insignificant event that causes a chain of events over time that create unpredictable outcomes. Well, all of life is unpredictable, but who's to say what is an insignificant event?
With the chaos theory, there are so many infinite possibilities that it's very, very difficult to say, oh yeah, because your mother did this to you as a child, and because of your potty training when you were 2, this is the effect. It is not linear. The chaos theory, if it were linear, would be very easy to deal with in terms of psychotherapy, but it's not linear. It has to do with a tremendous and infinite, complex number of things within the system that occurred back at the time that that person is going back to.
Edward Lorenz was a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology who studied the dynamics of atmospheres, in particular the Earth's atmosphere. And he made a simple model of the Earth's atmospheric dynamics, or at least he abstracted a simple mathematical model which contained some essential features of the dynamics of atmospheres. And yet this atmosphere, or this atmosphere model, this toy model, was capable of exhibiting chaotic behavior. Now you'll see a type of motion that's very clearly unpredictable, irregular. This is chaotic motion. So we start off with the pendulum undergoing what looks like initially somewhat regular motion. And then all of a sudden, the lower ball starts sinking, and this enables the upper one to swing over the top into circulation. And very rapidly, in less than half a minute, the bottom pendulum and the top pendulum separate and do their independent dances. Again, I want to emphasize that what we are looking at are two independent motions of identical dynamical systems that were started with very close but not exactly the same initial conditions. And over a very, very short time, only over a few swings, they diverged completely from each other in behavior.
Without a doubt, chaos is the natural state of affairs of human beings. We often think about control in our lives. As a matter of fact, the existential viewpoint is that we're not born, but we're thrown into the world. We're thrown into a rather chaotic world. Now, chaos I'm using here more as a lay term of chaos, not as a chaos in terms of chaos theory. But we're thrown into a rather chaotic, frenzied, wild, unmanageable state. And then we have to make choices moment by moment in order to make sense out of the chaos into which we're thrown.
Birth to death is a ride. By its very definition, it is unpredictable. There are no guarantees. Shit happens. Curveballs get thrown at us. Wonderful things happen. And how we deal with it is who we are and who we become. That's the ride.
And the problem is that when we try to control that which is out of our control, we become an incredibly anxiety-prone society. And that's what gets us into trouble.
We have very chaotic systems. We go about our everyday life and we're bombarded with inputs. And the smallest input can change. For example, you hear something, you're very sensitive to hearing things, especially if they're about you. You hear something about you which you might suspect is slightly derogatory. This can send you, even if you're fairly well balanced, into a temporary, let's say very minor depression. Can color that part of your day, a short part of your day, in which case you may decide to buy a candy bar to pick you up because chocolate makes some people feel better.
Now, how can you make predictions on a long-term basis given the finite components of a system, the complexity of a human being, how one human being sees something, how one human being reacts to something? There are so many infinite possibilities of the effect of one person on another. We cannot make long-term predictions.
To want to invite information that we have spent a lifetime avoiding knowing because we're terrified of how that may change the system, how that may create chaos in the system, is a very compelling challenge.
We have all these small inputs. We don't normally think of them that way, but if you sometimes feel a little bit depressed or a little bit elated, When you think about it, it may be some very, very small thing that made you that way. Just looking at something that's extremely pretty, which catches your eye and so on, may make you feel much better. And that can, so we're extremely sensitive to that, and I would say we're chaotic. We're a chaotic system.
If I'm afraid of being mugged in New York City walking down the street, I will become very, very cautious. As I become cautious, I become a target. Therefore, I am inviting the very thing that I'm afraid of. So yes, I think that chaos and the fear of the chaos actually invites more chaos.
We all want to control our lives in a way that we feel safe. And hopefully we make good decisions about feeling safe in life and feeling that we choose partners that help us feel safe and trusting. And we make decisions that help us feel safe and trusting. Beyond that, buckle in, pay attention, know who you are, what is a sense of self? I think, I feel, I value, and get ready to grow.
Is chaos bad? If we could live in a society of understanding chaos and living with chaos, and what we're really talking about is a concept in psychology called spontaneity. Being able to go with the moment, being able to stay with what is rather than control that which might be. So if we could flow with, if we could stay with the moment, if we could stay in the here and now, which is another psychological term, if we could be with what is, we wouldn't need necessarily to attempt so much control of what might be in the future.
On Wednesday, I got into.
When we first started writing, we were like, all right, we're gonna write it so it's so low budget that we'll be able to do it and no one will say no. And so everything was like no effects. Let's go, as soon as you're going back in time, it's gonna be a straight cut, maybe a flash of white, and maybe it's just, yeah, even more like startling, like what reality, everything like that. And as we progressed, and as this also became a studio film, and we about it, and we're like, nah, it's gonna enhance it. The effects are gonna be better. And we just jumped right in.
When I was on set, I was trying to come up with some concepts, and I had Chris order some butterflies, and we were, I didn't want to do the normal. They came up with a butterfly effect. I thought, well, what in the heck is the butterfly effect? And so I started thinking about butterflies, and they're kind of almost 2D, they're kind of cutouts. So I didn't want to do that. I wanted to have depth, a lot of depth as you're moving through the frame for the directors, because this film's all about depth. It's all about psychology, and so when I was on set, I was looking at, they were doing some playback, and they were doing a brain scan, a CAT scan of Ashton's head, and there was a looped piece of footage playing back, and I thought, that looks like a butterfly to me. And it was, just kind of vibrating a little bit. And I thought, that'll work.
One of the big things that we try to do is really reference films that they're talking about and go off of that. And quite often we'll take video cameras out and shoot our own material far, before anything ever happens in production. And the visual effects guys will run out there and we'll get our own little plates and start working with and manipulating that footage so that we have a good idea of what we're going to be shooting on the set. The original concept that the directors had was that every little object in Evan's room, or wherever Evan was, every little object that he had would shimmer and shake independently from each other. So his books, the sheets on his bed, his posters, his computer, they would all shake independently from themselves as he was transitioning back into time. We did several shots with this effect. We applied that to several shots And it just didn't lend itself, it didn't meet their expectations on screen. It was almost an idea that was a bit better served on paper than it was on screen. So we revisited that concept, and the directors finally phoned up Ralph one day and said, "Ralph, just make everything shake," And so we let the artists just have at her, and we made everything shake, and the guys went pretty overboard, and they were unleashed, and they came up with some really creative stuff. And it was up to Ralph and the directors to kind of reel them in and make sure that the tone of the visual effects were consistent with the tone of the movie.
The directors were both writers and directors, so we got a kind of a global thought on the whole thing from them. And then I hit them with a lot of visuals. We immediately, as soon as we picked up the show, we got in there and we started just taking early visualizations and throwing them up in front of them and just trying to get feedback, because I needed to get online with them, kind of figure out where their heads were at, and we used that, and that really helped tie us in pretty quickly. Pre-visualization was the key in this one. Initially was just going to be Ashton sitting up into frame, and it was a little dry. There wasn't much drama there, and the directors weren't too hip on it. They wanted to push that envelope, and of course, this was a small film. It wasn't a big budget for MoCo or for any of the high-tech gear that we would normally bring in for that kind of thing. So I sat with Matt Leonetti and the two directors in the room, and we just bantered for a while, and we came up with this move, this camera move that comes up off Ashton and pulls back and settles as he sits up into frame. And there were several problems with the shot, but having been an artist myself for years, I knew what we could get away with and what we couldn't. And so we were able to use that to get away with a shot that normally you wouldn't be able to pull off in this budget as well, that just you wouldn't know. I mean, the whole plate had to be rebuilt. We had shadows crossing pillows of his arm, I mean, his arm was really there, so we had to remove all that. And he had shadows that crossed the pillow, and the pillow, at one point his arm depresses the pillow, so that had to be fixed. The flesh, the matching of the flesh and everything was extremely well done. I'm still very proud of how they pulled that off. So we have all these little pieces that I'll know and the artists will know, and we'll all be staring at it going, wow, it works.
The first thing that we did to help blend the CG skin with Ashton's real skin is actually go out and take real pictures of Ashton's skin. So we took close-ups, stills of his skin, several shots, and then later on down the road we stitched those all together and provided texture for the 3D model, at which point that was applied to. And the other major key to this shot is the motion of the shot, and unfortunately the budget of this film didn't really lend itself to big setups and big rigs and motion controls and whatnot. So we had a fantastic camera operator in Dolly Grip, and they accomplished what we needed to just simply with a dolly and a camera move, and they were able to repeat their moves constantly for us, and we needed several plates for this shot.
And I guess the tricky part of that shot was that we had to match him getting up and dollying back at the same speed, and we didn't use motion control, so we had to count either by osmosis or a stop clock. The dolly had to be pulled back just absolutely perfect, and but we pulled it off, and I think we did it within like a 10th or quarter of a second, so I think they were able to match up in the computer. Otherwise it'd been a motion control shot, and that would have probably been a little more expensive than the way we did it.
We had 3 of these mailboxes. They're expensive to build. And we weren't sure how it was, the directors wanted it to come apart, and there's all about how much packing you want and how much depth cord, and it can come apart in many different ways, and it's all about how much big of a fireball you want and this whole thing. And this is supposed to be like a little bigger than an M100? It was like an M80. I used to blow up mailboxes with M80s, and that's like pop. But the directors wanted it, a little bigger than that. So we went and we did an explosion, And the explosion that we put in there was pretty big. And so then we did a rough comp. We put the AD's son in there and blew him up. And we showed that to the directors, and they thought that was great. And then obviously they sat on that for a day, right? They thought about it for a day. And the next thing I know, the next day, the explosion was twice as big. And it actually, when we actually shot the shot, the explosion was so big, it was beyond the camera point of view. So we had to reshoot it again. So now we're on our last mailbox, and it's getting dark. It's just one of those days, you know. It was the end of the shoot day. We'd already lost one, and so we got it all back, got it together, exploded it. It's kind of interesting what we did. Because it was getting late and everything, we ended up isolating the mailbox and putting it into a hero shot that was shot earlier in the day. And then we, of course, had to dress up some of the sides of the mailbox and everything before it explodes. But yeah, so we got it on the last explosion and got away with it.
With lighting him, we had to, so we couldn't put lights above. We didn't want lights on top. We wanted lights, I think we put the lights below him. Time that so we didn't get flares, and the speed of the dolly was critical, that we made it pretty much the same speed and when we did the room and when we did him. So that was a tricky one.
Well, effects are always there to support the plot, and the directors, right from the beginning, it was a global thought. They thought about everything. I mean, everything had its place, and it was well thought out. It wasn't an effect just because they wanted an effect. It was there for a reason, and it was there to strike a chord in the theater gore, and hopefully it'll do that.